Um, well, guess that answers that question. Hello, everyone. We're going to get started in a bit, just waiting for others to hop on. Thanks for being so prompt. We'll wait another minute or so and then begin. Thanks for taking the time to be here this evening or afternoon, depending on where you are.
Yep, just 5 p.m. in California.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it must be nice. Greetings, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started in 1 more minute. Okay, just okay. Well, George, what do you say? Think we want to get this ship a sail? You're on mute.
I'm ready to roll, bro.
Okay, well, with that encouragement, why don't we begin? Welcome, everyone. Appreciate you taking the time to be here this evening. It is the March 2022 monthly educational program of Move to Amend. The subject tonight is how corporate constitutional rights fuel wars abroad and at home. So my name is Greg Coleridge. I'm the former outreach director, now co-director of Move to Amend, and joining me is...
Hi, I'm George Friday. I'm one of the founders of Move to Amend, and I'm currently on the board of directors.
Great. So appreciate all of you taking the time. Just before we begin, a couple of housekeeping matters. If you are not on mute at the moment, please put yourself there so that we can try to have as clear of a conversation and discussion going forward as possible. If you wish to make a comment, ask a question, you can do so in a couple of different ways. One is either put it in chat, and that pertains to whether you are on Zoom, or thanks to Alfonso Saldana, who is monitoring Facebook and YouTube. And if you are joining us via that route, thank you so much. He forward and place in chat your questions or comments in this chat so that we So those of you on Facebook and YouTube, obviously you don't have to silence or mute yourself, but if you're on Zoom here, you do. The other option is if you're joining us here on the call and you wish to comment verbally, you will see down at the very bottom a little icon of reactions. If you click on that, there is a option of clicking a little icon hand being raised. Click on a hand will appear on your image, whether it's an actual image or a name, and that will indicate to us that we can call on you at an appropriate time. So with that being said, we thought we would begin with some self-introductions, then followed by just some general introductory comments by each of us, George and myself. That would occur after just introducing Move to Men for those of you who may not be completely aware of who we are and what we're about. And then we're going to open it up for some dialogue, discussion, questions, queries, consternations, concerns, whatever the case may be. So with that, and again, thank you so much for joining. George, I want to say a little bit about yourself and why you are here and what you bring to the table related to this topic.
Good Lord. Well, I'm going to try to do it in 2 minutes. So I'm George Friday. I live in Gastonia, North Carolina. I am a native of North Carolina and very happy to be a Southerner. It's a thing. And at the moment, I'm really happy to be an alumni of UNC Chapel Hill because I'm a big basketball fan. And after this weekend coming up, it may all be over for the Heels, but at the moment, I'm in a happy, happy place. I have my first job out of college was with Sane Freeze, which is now Peace Action. I'm on the board of National Peace Action here in North Carolina. I work for North Carolina Peace Action, and nationally, I work for United for Peace and Justice. And I served as the co-chair of UFPJ from 2003 to 2007. So that's me in a little bit of a nutshell. Greg?
Wow, that didn't even take 2 minutes, George. Greg Coleridge. I worked prior to coming to Move to Men for 35 years with the American Friends Service Committee, a Quaker social action organization in Northeast Ohio, involved over the many decades working on the National Nuclear Weapons Freeze campaign as a regional organizer in Ohio. And while at AFSC, American Friends Service Committee, on a variety of various weapon systems opposed to them: B-1 bomber, nuclear Trident attack submarine, the cruise missile, Army tank coated with depleted uranium, worked on various organizing in opposition to various wars and occupations in military actions from Panama to Serbia, Kosovo, Yemen, Afghanistan, Syria, Iran, Gulf Wars 1 and 2, the wider war on terror. You know, there's always something going on, right? Have been, during the Gulf War II, was chair of the Northeast Ohio Anti-War Coalition. And American Friends Service Committee, last thing is, one of our programs at the time was working against violence, in resolving violence peacefully. And so there was a program we worked on that was related to conflict resolution called Alternatives to Violence that we promoted across Ohio and in fact around the country. So that's a little of who I am. And what we wanted to do now is just very briefly, for those of you who are Move to Men, to just in a couple of minutes, share with you basically our mission, purposes, goals, and the like, beginning with the mission. As you may know, some of you and some of you maybe not, Move to Men is a coalition of what is now over 600 organizations and upwards of 480,000 individuals committed. We all are to social and economic justice, ending corporate rule, and going even beyond that, trying to build for the very first time an authentic, vibrant, legitimate democracy that is genuinely accountable to we the people, and not just we the people, but all the people, which would be refreshing since it's never been the case ever in the history of this country. So that's our mission. George?
And our principles and values, we have 5 of those. Number 1, anti-oppression and solidarity organizing. That's how you build power. And second, coalition and movement building, because we need a movement to transform everything. Third is grassroots organizing from the bottom up. Fourth is dedication to political education constantly, because this is the work we need to do. And fifth, keep our political and economic independence. This is vital. Our primary goals, or among them, passing the We the People Amendment to make it clear that artificial entities do not have constitutional rights and that money is not speech. Another goal is for us to provoke discussion, provoke organizing around how to make real the promise of American democracy through constitutional renewal.
Great. Just briefly, our goal is amending the Constitution to create this We the People Amendment. And for individuals not familiar with how that happens and what that means, there's really two stages. The first is in Congress. We need, whether it's We the People Amendment or any other amendment that any other group is trying to create. And we've had, of course, 27 of them already. You need 2/3 support in both houses of Congress, that is the House and the Senate. They must pass a resolution in support of the amendment. And then 3/4 of the states must ratify. So right now that means 38 states. So that's the conventional way. That's the way that all the amendments up to this point have been created and ratified. But there is a second way that amendment can be created, and that's through a issue-specific constitutional convention, through Article 5. And the process is pretty much the same. 2/3 of state legislatures call for a convention to propose an amendment, which means 34 states. And then when they come up with whatever they come up with that's presented, then 3/4 of the state must ratify that amendment as presented, which again is 38 states. Sometimes there is, as with the ERA, a time limit. Most of the time there's not. And I mean, there's a whole controversy around whether the ERA should be passed because there was an original time limit that wasn't satisfied originally. So that's how one amends the Constitution.
So how are we going to get this done? What's our strategy? Our strategy includes coalition building, so that we're reaching out to other organizations that are working on issues that are affected by corporate power, building strong coalitions. We also working to build a broad and diverse, multiracial, intergenerational movement, so that we're also reaching out to the people who are most affected by corporate rule, most negatively affected by corporate rule, of course. And community organizing, not just activism. Activism is getting your signs and showing up outside of the governor's mansion and rattling your chains and screaming and yelling. That's activism. Community organizing is building power, one community at a time, one group of people at a time, one organization at a time. Community organizing, basic, important. And a focus on grassroots organizing to pass local and state resolutions calling for an amendment. So ground up change.
Great. And lastly, by way of background, is just our structure for people who may not be familiar with it. We are both a national and a grassroots based organization all at the same time. Nationally, we have a national team made up of board people like George and staff, myself and 4 or 5 others. We have issue and sector caucuses and committees that focus on either constituencies or issues or functions. A law and research committee, a labor caucus. We're just going to be launching next month a ecological caucus. And then we have various coalition projects that are campaigns, issues, activities, and the like. So that's how we function nationally. At the grassroots level, we are an affiliate-based organization. So we have several dozen affiliates that exist across the country, east, west, and south. If you're interested in finding out more about that or becoming part of one or helping start one, put your name in the chat and we'll follow up with you. As opposed to an organized grouping, called an affiliate, there is something that we call an advocate. That's more or less a one-person democratic, nonviolent wrecking crew, if you will, who goes out and, like Johnny or Jane Apple, spreads the message of Move to Amend and may already be involved, you or others, in groups and organizations that takes the Move to Amend message to that group and finds the intersections. So again, if you're interested in finding out more about what it takes to become a Move to Amend advocate, feel free to let us know by putting in your name in the chat. And then we have various, the People Amendment working groups. These are organizations that are existing, that do other work on other things, but sort of adopt Move to Amend as one of additional project that when it comes time in particular to lobby, or when it comes time particularly do organizing and mobilizing around an issue to get on the street or do something else, those organizations can be called upon as being supporters. So they're self-standing. They may be doing other work that is directly or indirectly connected to democracy issues. They may be a healthcare organization or peace organization or something else, but one of many projects that they work on is Move to Amend and or We the People Amendment. So that's a little about who we are and what we do, and appreciate your patience as we reviewed that. In many cases, what you already know, but for some of you who may be new information. So with that, so George, we wanted to spend a little bit of time at this juncture, just kind of giving some reactions or reflections to what is in the news related to what is happening in Europe right now, in Ukraine and Western Europe. And we had agreed beforehand that, you take a few minutes to sort of provide some reflections on, from your perspective and your insight and your work, working on peace issues and justice issues from the peace action venue. So you want to start, and then I'll focus on a few things that have come up my way.
Yes, because I'm going to share about what's underneath what's going on now from my perspective. And the root, I think this is me, George Friday, this isn't Move to Amend officially. I think the root of all the problems are white supremacy and misogyny, and driven by greed. So that's George Friday's, it's not analysis, it's just what I see. And in our country and in our lifetimes, fear keeps being used over and over again to confuse and delude us here in the US, possibly people worldwide, into buying into the lie that military weapons keep us safe. We know that's not true. We know there's no need for a huge military budget. There's no need to send weapons to Ukraine because war is stupid. But we get conditioned, I think through fear, among other things, to believe that we absolutely have to have this. We have to have a military. We have to have this kind of police force. We have to control this sector of people. And I encourage you to think about who benefits. Who benefits through ongoing, endless war, increasing spending and resources to control other countries, to occupy other countries. So that to me is one of the things that's underneath this, is a greed-driven need to control our thinking so that we go along with what keeps the tiniest percentage of the people on this planet moving and wealthy. So that keeps coming around and around for me, Greg. Over the last few weeks, my anxiety about what's going on and escalating, certainly as somebody whose first job was with Sane Freeze and whose birthday is Hiroshima Day, it's like, what is happening? And in my work, I think I may have told you this, maybe 2 weeks ago or so, we heard of quiet talk of negotiation. And one of the reasons it was thought of as good is that it was quiet. It wasn't getting a lot of press. And from what was getting to me through this communication process of not US people saying this, but that there were meetings happening and they'd gone at this point, 2 or 3 weeks ago, they'd gone the first day before things were done, they left the room and people didn't meet, but they were on their third day of meetings and breaking into breakout rooms to talk about things, all very encouraging. But then today I talked to someone, a great activist in Philadelphia, who mentioned some crazy video that was floating around that I hadn't heard of, thank God, because part of it is I try to avoid stuff that would make me crazy. But something called Watch World War III, and using clips of things that are happening now. And that is the kind of thing, y'all, that feeds into the lie, that feeds into the conditioning. Our culture has conditioned us from birth. So, white supremacy is in the air, it's conditioned into us, misogyny is conditioned into us, homophobia, heterosexism, it's all there, unless we consciously weed it out on a regular basis, because it's gonna come some more. So that, when he told me about that, I'm like, he's like, well, that's, lots of people have seen it. Lots of people are getting conditioned and prepared and nummified, or somehow prepared to accept craziness. And we can't, we have to stand up and say, no, there's no way I'm going to be fooled into this foolishness. I'm going to shut up and let you go, Greg.
Well, thanks, George. I just want to start by saying you moved to amend. Well, first, again, thanks so much for being on the call. And for those on Facebook and YouTube, thanks for joining us. Just to sort of preface everything by saying Move to Amend has not taken an official position organizationally on what's going on in Ukraine. But we all agree that that there should be an immediate ceasefire. There needs to be diplomacy, and I think as well, I think we're in agreement that there needs to be humanitarian aid, if not resettlement of all the refugees and displaced persons, just out of sheer compassion and humanity. Diplomacy is something that should have happened. Negotiations certainly is preferable to warfare and violence, whereas conflict is inevitable, no question, it always is. Resolving that conflict through violence is not inevitable. There are always nonviolent ways of resolving conflict. And so all those need to be pursued. So while organizationally we've not taken a position, I think it's fair to say that we all sort of believe those basic principles. But nevertheless, there are reasons for Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. Some of them deal with the history and politics and culture and territory, and not really, and of course NATO expansion, and don't really want to get into any of those because the focus mostly is around sort of the connections of corporate rule and how corporate constitutional rights are fueling what's going on here, and skirmishes and wars and occupations and aggressions by this country has been for a very long time. So that's kind of the arena I want to focus on. And toward that end, when it comes to transnational corporations, their drive for profits, which fuels what they do, peace is simply not profitable. I mean, let's face it. Conflict and violent responses to conflict are needed to justify both the permanent war economy, and if you come right down to it, a war economy is our economy. We have nothing that we really produce anymore that we sell or trade abroad, food to a certain extent. But other than that, it's weaponry that we either give away or we sell. Arms sales by this country is, we have more arms sales than any other country, several countries combined. So that is the basic national economic policy, industrial policy of this country. So having said that, there are, I think, at least six major ways that corporate entities profit from wars. And I just want to go through these very briefly and then talk about how this connects to corporate constitutional rights. The first has to do with control of strategic resources. Ukraine, despite the fact that it's relatively a small country, 5% of the entire Earth's natural and mineral resources are there. And Ukraine is also incredibly rich agriculturally. So the natural resources are fossil fuels, precious metals, including, very precious, not just gold and silver, but those things that are required for, advanced solar and lithium for batteries and all the rest. So it's very important country in terms of natural resources and agriculture. So in that sense, this is more than just a political war, territorial war. It's a resource war. And so energy, mining, agricultural companies that are US-based transnational are competing with transnational corporations elsewhere from other countries to try to get a piece of it, to put their claws in that very resource-rich country. It's also an excuse, and we've seen and heard, probably felt in our pocketbooks, have we not, that the crisis in Ukraine has been an excuse for domestic oil and gas corporations to raise prices. But besides strategic resources, in terms of it being a control of strategic resources, it's more than just the metals and the oil and the like. It's also potentially human resources. Are in the past interventions and wars have been to try to get a corner on the market for cheap labor, and in some cases very highly skilled labor. When West Germany combined with East Germany, my goodness, the West Germans moved all their manufacturing over to the East, and there were very highly skilled East Germans. So they got cheap labor, and they were able to produce things much more cheaply in the East, former East, than they were in the West. So, you can't forget about labor. Export production from high wage to low wage countries has been a hallmark of capital in this country, whether it's going from the north to the south in the country, or south to Mexico, or to China, or Vietnam, wherever. That's been sort of a basic premise. So that's control of strategic resources. Second, production of weapons that are given or sold is, a very way corporations profit from war, right? I mean, they produce the tanks, planes, bullets, food, military bases are among the many items supplied to governments by military contractors. And the sort of the main contractors that maybe you've seen in the news: Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, Northrop Grumman. Those are considered to be the 5 prime contractors. And when they get these contracts from, our tax dollars through the Pentagon military spending budget, they farm out to subcontractors by the hundreds, if not the thousands, that end up, many of them in our congressional districts, which makes it all the more difficult to try to put a reverse on this. Because again, that's where jobs are, that's where income comes, that's where people are hired, that's sort of the industrial base. But weapons production is even more profitable than simply, just getting contracts by these prime contractors, because there's this thing called cost plus contracts that guarantee a certain percentage profit. So if you spend $1 million, if the contract is, we'll give you the contract and you can charge an extra, 5% on it on top of whatever your normal profit margin, then you're incentivized to boost up the cost of building that product because you're making 5% more on it. So it incentivizes being wasteful of the waste, cost, and abuse. The U.S. has committed more than $4 billion to military assistance to Ukraine since 2014. And recently, maybe you've seen the news within the last couple of weeks, that includes an additional $800 million in weaponry. And that's what we've seen, the recent transition. It just sort of, it started out, 2014, last couple of years of being sort of low, helmets, flak jackets and the like. But now we're talking about, big time weaponry in terms of anti-armor systems, anti-aircraft missiles, anti-tank missiles, personal weapons, 20 million rounds of ammunition, and a half dozen. So Raytheon, for example, maybe you've heard about on a recent earnings call, the CEO of Raytheon was talking about the tensions in Eastern Europe. And he said, quote, "We just have to look to last week or we saw the drone attack in the United Arab Emirates, which have attacked some of their other facilities. And of course, the tensions in Eastern Europe, the tensions in the South China Sea, all of these things are putting pressure on some of the defense spending over there. So I fully expect we're going to see some benefit from it, unquote. So this was a statement made to their investors. Lockheed Martin has done the same. Hey, happy days are here again when it comes to military contractors. So that's a second way that corporations profit from warfare. Very quickly, a third way is, well, you got to, when you actually use these weapons, that's profitable, because by using the weapons, guess what? It means you deplete those weapons. So you've got to reorder them. And it's not only the contractors, corporate contractors that benefit from it, but other contractors benefit from it. The Iraq War, for example, saw an explosion for the very first time of business corporations receiving contracts to hire soldiers. Maybe you remember Blackwater, which is now called something else, Z or X or something like that. And there's, all sorts of logistical support. Halliburton was supplying food and supplies and bases and all. So no longer is waging war exclusively sort of a public thing that comes from the public Pentagon. Waging wars have become, like so many other things in our society, increasingly privatized or corporatized. Fourth element of how corporations benefit from war and profit from war is reconstruction. All right, so you build the weapons, you use the weapons to blow things up. Well, after you blow things up, you got to repair them, right? You got to rebuild them. And so that's where the corporate made bombs that blow up buildings, then the government gives money to other corporations such as Bechtel Corporation in Iraq, and who knows what US-based companies are going to be given money to rebuild. And just a recent report from the United Nations Development Program released last week estimated that over $100 million in damage has already been done in Ukraine through their infrastructure. So we're going to see, and how it works is either the US gives loans, and that, through the World Bank, which we give like 15% of the budget. Well, that's US tax dollars that goes from our pocketbooks to the World Bank, that then goes to loans to Ukraine, that they then are conditioned oftentimes to say, sometimes it's direct US loans from the US, sometimes it's through things like the World Bank. So these countries like Ukraine will get those loans, but it comes with strings. A certain percentage of those loans have to go to rebuilding, have to go to companies that are US to rebuild. So that money never even really reaches Ukraine. It just goes, in one pocket, out the other, from the US back to the US to hire US-based contractors to go over and rebuild. So those are the, it's a cycle there. So those are the four main ways, just very briefly. The obvious ways the business corporations profit from wars and occupations, but there's two other paths that are not as obvious, but incredibly important. The first is, hey, when money is spent for war, generally that money isn't in the corporate or isn't in the government treasury. It means the government debt goes up. And so when government debt goes up, because of military spending, which this year is at historic proportions, and that's even before, it's going to be even more debt thanks to the $800 million that's gone to Ukraine. What that means is that we're going to have to pay back that debt, communities and citizens. So, what that generally means is when communities have to pay back, that when communities are not receiving the funding that they used to receive because of budget priorities, because priorities are going more toward warfare and less toward helping people and meeting humanitarian needs and social needs, then communities have to go into debt, which by law means they have to, at the state level and at the local level, they just can't go into debt like the federal government does in the same way. They go into debt by offering up debt instruments that are called bonds or munis at the state level and the local level. And those bonds, or municipal bonds particularly, are sold to banks and to individual investors. So banking corporations profit enormously from those municipal debts. So that's the fifth way. And then finally, the last way that corporations benefit from warfare and interventions and the like is at a local level. Sort of a different subset of corporations benefit, again, because communities are not receiving the money that they have, and they have to go into debt by getting these municipal bonds. Those municipal bonds, right, have to be paid back. And the only way to pay them back really is two ways. They either have to raise taxes or they have to sell off public assets. So if you raise taxes, then we all get stiffed, right? If we're citizens, people don't like to do that. The local city councils don't like to do that. So instead, what they do is they sell off public assets, which means you privatize or corporatize public assets. We've seen this in the past. We're going to see more of it. Of course, going into war and warfare and debt incurred from war is not the only way that communities suffer, not the only way communities are not getting public funds. When we give tax breaks to wealthy individuals, that's another way communities are starved and have to then sell off public assets. But all of those companies out there that can benefit from getting, assets, a dime or a nickel on the dollar benefit, whether it's privatizing healthcare or hospitals or sewer systems, water systems, all of that is tremendous. So just to conclude, how does all this connect to corporate constitutional rights? Well, of course, corporate entities, whether they're the military contractors, the agricultural contractors, the energy companies, the oil and fossil fuel companies, or all these other entities that directly or indirectly benefit from these kinds of policies, they're doing their darnest, particularly the military contractors, the oil and gas corporations, and the finance banking corporations are doing their darnest to contributing and to lobbying a Congress to make sure that this money ends up going directly to warfare and then indirectly coming back to benefit them. And that
Greg,
happens
that's
because
so
of
much.
corporate constitutional
It's
rights.
hard to believe that's real. It's so very much. I mean, it's overwhelming to hear in some ways, but I know that they justify it. One of the ways they do it is fear. The other thing is they push us as a culture to look for someone to blame. And while we're running around looking for somebody to blame, all those other people you're talking about, the lobbyists and the contractors and the vermin, are making their deals and making their money while we're trying to figure out where to point the finger of blame. It's very frustrating.
Yeah.
So,
well, sorry for going into all of that, but it's important to understand how the corporate entities, because of corporate constitutional rights, in particular, the First Amendment, right of free speech, how corporations have used that right of free speech to lobby and to give political campaign contributions.
Wow. So, I guess they're having fun now.
They are.
Those guys.
So would this be a good time just to kind of open it up?
Yes, it is.
If people
but
want...
first,
Sure.
Let us take a musical interlude. That is a good timing for a musical interlude, Greg?
It is.
Okay.
Do you have the permission to...
I do. I have, I think, all I need.
And you don't want to miss
y'all
this.
Who are experiencing this musical interlude to listen closely to the words of this human being and enjoy.
Back when Eisenhower was the president, golf courses is where most of his time was spent. So I never really listened to what the president said because in general, I believed that the general was politically dead. But he always seemed to know when the muscles were about to be flexed. Because I remember him saying something, mumbling something about a military-industrial complex. Americans no longer fight to keep their shores safe, just to keep the jobs going in the arms-making workplace. And then they pretend to be gripped by some sort of political reflex. But all they're doing is paying dues to the military-industrial complex. Military and the monetary. Military and the monetary. Military and the monetary. The military and the monetary get together whenever they think it's necessary. They turn our brothers and sisters into mercenaries. They are turning the planet to a cemetery. The military and the monetary use the media as intermediaries. They are determined to keep the citizens secondary. They make so many decisions that are arbitrary. We're marching behind the commander-in-chief who was standing under a spotlight shaking like a leaf. But the ship of state had landed on an economic reef, so we knew he was going to bring us messages of grief. The military and the monetary were shielded by January and went storming into February. Brought us pot-bellied generals as luminaries. 2 weeks ago I hadn't heard the sumbitch, now all of a sudden he's legendary. They took the honor from the honorary, they took the dignity from the dignitaries, they took the secrets from the secretary, but they left the bitch an obituary. The military and the monetary from thousands of miles away in a Saudi Arabian sanctuary had us all scrambling for our dictionaries because we couldn't understand the fucking vocabulary. Yeah, there was some smart bombs, but there were some dumb ones as well. Scared the hell out of CNN in that Baghdad hotel. The military and the monetary, they get together whenever they think it's necessary. War in the desert sometimes sure is scary, but they beamed out the war to all their subsidiaries, tried to make so damn insane a worthy adversary, keeping the citizens secondary, scaring old folks into coronaries. The military and the monetary from thousands of miles in a Saudi Arabian sanctuary kept us all wondering if all of this was really, truly necessary. We've got to work for peace. Peace ain't coming this way. If we only work for peace, if everyone believed in peace the way they say they do, we'd have peace. The only thing wrong with peace is that you can't make no money from it. The military and the monetary, they get together whenever they think it's necessary. They've turned our brothers and sisters into mercenaries. They are turning the planet into a cemetery. We got to work for peace. Peace ain't coming this way. We should not allow ourselves to be misled by talk of entering a time of peace. Peace is not the absence of war, it is the absence of the rumors of war and the threats of war and the preparation for war. Peace is not the absence of war, it is the time when we will all bring ourselves closer to each other, closer to building a structure that is unique within ourselves because we have finally come to peace within ourselves. Military and the monetary, military and the monetary, military and the monetary get together whenever they think it's necessary. They have turned our brothers and sisters into mercenaries. They are turning parts of the planet into a cemetery. What you gonna do? Military and the monetary, military and the monetary. What you gonna do? We hounded the Ayatollah religiously, bombed Libya and killed Gaddafi's son hideously. We turned our back on our allies, the Panamanians, and saw Ali North selling guns to the Iranians. Watched Gorbachev slaughtering the Lithuanians. We better warn the Amish, they may bomb the Pennsylvanians. The military and the monetary get together whenever they think it's necessary. They have turned our brothers and sisters into mercenaries. They are turning the planet into a cemetery. They got folks out there working for war. 2, 3, 4. Make a whole lot of money, start a little trouble, it's a war. Turn this planet into north and south, it's a war. Start a few rumors over there, make money with a war. Peace. Say it to yourself. I believe we got to work for peace. Peace ain't gonna be free, you gotta work for peace. You believe in peace, gotta go to work. They got folks out there working for war. Start a little trouble over here, what you got is a war. Turn these folks in the north and south, it's a war. Start a little trouble over here, what you got is a war. Tell everybody you know, we gotta work for peace. Gotta work, gotta work. You believe in peace, time to go to work. I don't want to sound like no late night commercial, but it's a matter of fact that there are thousands of children all over the world in Asia and Africa and in South America who need our help. When they start talking about 55 cents a day and 70 cents a day, I know a lot of folks feel as though that's not really any kind of contribution to make, but we had to give up $1.50 just to get in the subway nowadays. So this is a song about tomorrow and about how tomorrow can be better if we all, each one reach one, each one try to teach one. Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. Everyone must play a part. Everyone got to go to work. Work for peace. Spirit say work. Work for peace. You believe things say go to work. You believe in peace time, go to work. Can't be waving your hand no more, go to work. Everything you ever really wanted, had to go to work.
Got to go to work.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, George. Well, at this point, feel free if you want to ask a question, make a comment. Again, you can do so in chat, or if you want to raise your hand, I will try to monitor and unmute you, or you can unmute yourself.
Greg, I wonder if there are folks on the Zoom here that have participated in any initiatives where they are lately to either expose corporate rule or work for peace. I'd love to hear those stories if y'all have them.
Yep. Please do share.
Someone on a meeting I was with in the last few days, Greg, who's older than me, remembers the duck and cover in schools. You know anybody who did that when they were like, we had fire drills. They had the nuclear bomb is going to go off drills, and this is not funny, but I do giggle. They were told to get under their desk.
Right.
Y'all know those desks we were in? Getting under a wooden desk is going to protect you.
Right.
That is some scary stuff. I didn't really know much about that until somebody said it today. But
yeah,
apparently it was a real thing. I don't know if it was everywhere, but it was at least where this person was.
Yeah, a little later on, maybe people would recall when was it during Reagan administration? I think when there was a potential fear nuclear war, the was to go out in your backyard, dig a hole, climb in it, and somehow put the dirt on top of yourself. And they, the statement was, it's the dirt that does it, that protects.
Oh, they will tell us anything. Jessica's put in the chat, our own Jessica Munger, that there are anti-war protests happening in her city. And I think she's in Nevada or someplace.
Las
So Vegas. Not as many.
Yeah.
Is she in Nevada? Not as many as I would expect, but some. And it's difficult to mobilize over a long period. Yes, it is. And it's difficult to mobilize in a sustained way. But that's what you're seeing. That a sustained mobilizing is activism, but it creates relationships and builds power. So that's actually very, very good. Because long after the protest is over, those relationships will still be there.
Yeah, it's important that those events, though, not become just one-off, that they are trying to build for something. Mm-hmm. And so toward that end, one consciously, the organizers of those events need to try to take names, need to try to, encourage people to come back, whether it's physically or because of Zoom, you can do something in between physical actions to do education or do strategizing and the like. But there's been quite a delayed reaction to having sort of anti-war events. I've noticed around the country this go around, in part because I think.
Tell me the delayed reaction. Tell me more about what that looks like.
Well, it just means that people, I think, we're trying to get a handle early on of what is happening and what is an appropriate role and an inappropriate role. Because obviously there was some, or like a lot of agreement, but some disagreement out to what extent the U.S. Involved in expanding and calling for expansion of NATO should be. How much of an argument or point should that be in any of the anti-war actions? So some difference of opinion around that.
Yeah, right. One of the things that's great about doing that sustained mobilization and having that list of people and contact information is, sadly, this is not the last time we've got to confront the unacceptable. So what's great when you've got those group of people is, all right, we're here, we're at the governor's mansion this month. Next month, we've got to go to the school board. They're doing something crazy. Month after that, it's the Energy Commission because something crazy is happening there. And when you've got that sustained mobilization and a growing number of people, that creates that sort of 100th monkey effect, so that you start building wins, more and more wins. The here in North Carolina, in the western part of the state, there's a awesome group of people who are on their second year of what is called the Reject Raytheon campaign. The city gave a whole bunch of land and all kinds of stuff to Raytheon, and they're creating, a small part of what will be in their weapons in North Carolina. And of course, it didn't create any local jobs, and it completely destroyed a unique environmental region. There are these, I can't think of the word for it, but it has the word, some kind of biological something that doesn't exist everywhere. And they destroyed it to build this Raytheon plant. It's crazy. Yeah. But those folks have grown over time and have now aligned with other environmental groups and religious groups, and it's a beautiful thing. Yeah. So it's a beautiful thing if it happens in other places too.
I think what's important is if people want to participate, help organize, or participate in actions that may be occurring in your community, is certainly focusing on some of the horrific actions going on. But in the end, this really isn't a federal budget priorities problem, or a Raytheon problem, or Halliburton or Lockheed problem. It's not really even a NATO problem, or a national security problem, or a problem of any single public official. Ultimately, we have systemic problems. And the major one being, we have a democracy problem. And that's really at root of what's going on. Besides the fact that we sort of have a vision problem, in which the vision and the narrative that we've been led to believe in this country is that we can have endless more, and that we have an economic system and a political system in which sort of militarism and endless more capitalism go hand in hand.
Doesn't make a bit of sense.
And corporatism and militarism just sort of are two parts of the same track, and that's what we got to deal with. And so it's important, participate in the events, but they need to be contextualized, that ultimately we're not in a position of fundamentally deciding much of anything. And that's why move to amend is so important, and why sort of, working on trying to stop a weapons system, or trying to stop a war, or trying to stop a bad military contract is, again, sort of similar to all the other sort of single issue kinds of things that groups are out there doing, that is important to be done, but
it
needs to be
won't
done in
result in
context.
the ultimate thing we need.
Yeah. It needs to be done in context, and we need to focus on, in the larger picture. And so that's why the move to amend the We the People important is just so fundamentally significant.
So how are we doing in that realm? What are the concrete steps that can be, taken that will result in us being closer to having a real democracy? It'd be nice to see.
Yeah, and there are ways for individuals who may not be we're doing and what's going on with our campaign. There are things that can be done, and if you're interested, check out our website at moveToAmend.org/motion if you want to sign our petition. Donate. If you want to make a donation, moveToAmend.org/pledge-amend. Pledge-amend is to get information and to become involved in our Pledge to Amend campaign that tries to get on. And yeah, thanks so much for posting that, whoever did so. Our effort at trying to get candidates for office to take our pledge. And that pledge, of course, is saying that if I'm elected, I will do everything I can to try to pass our We the People amendment that has these two conditions. One, to say that money is not politics. And second, that money is not speech. Political money in elections is not free speech under the First Amendment. And second, that corporate entities do not have inalienable constitutional rights. People are people. So those are people can get involved in where you.
So one of the things I have not learned well in all these many months on Zoom is how to follow the chat. So I lose messages, but Larry Krasner, thanks for this, Larry. I'm going to try to read it. I might need help. And there's one under there, but I don't know what it is yet because I can't scroll past it. But what Larry tells us is that right now, I'm an opportunist in bringing the Move to Amend message to other groups I'm involved with, making the connection with these groups, and then I lost it when I tried to scroll, with these groups and politicians when our message intersects with their mission. Brilliant. That's fantastic. And even more fantastic that you're in a place where such a thing is possible. Yeah. North Carolina is not exactly that, but we do have a few people that are idiots. Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly the charge. Exactly the charge, to find the intersection so that we can
Yes.
support one another.
Mhm.
Absolutely, positively.
That way, when you approach that elected official, they're like, well, of course, this makes complete sense. I'll take the pledge.
Yeah. Because part of it is, we have a plan. We have a plan to try. It's not just, oh my gosh, let's go jump off a bridge somewhere, as horrific as it is. If we think that ultimately the problem is that we don't have a real authentic democracy, never have, and that as a result, the militarism and corporatism have been roaring down the pathway. Michael Parenti, a long time ago, anti-war activist and political scientist, said the sword and the dollar go hand in hand. And that's so true. So, instead of just resisting that, you got to have a plan. And so our plan is this We the People amendment. And so we're lobbying for this 28th Amendment. We have 90 co-sponsors. And in the chat is the link to the amendment itself. The Pledge to Amend is a way to, get your candidates to pledge by signing that motion to amend. You can become involved in what we're up to and get emails periodically of information and how you can become more involved and other ways. But we're also trying to build, a movement. And so what Larry mentions of trying to connect with other groups in that way is sort of to connect in ways that, because ultimately, if we're going to build the power necessary to really create an authentic democracy movement, we have to have a movement of movements of people that are working for, all these single issues sort of coming together and saying there's some systemic change that needs to happen, one of which is the We the People amendment. But that's not the only one.
Right. Waltz left us. He put a note in the chat that we need a more effective way of connecting the dots. There isn't a, so back in the day when I was younger and you get trained to be an organizer, you have to learn, you may know this phrase, Greg Coleridge, an elevator speech, which is something you could say to persuade someone to your side in the time you're in an elevator. Move to amend does not fit an elevator speech. We're talking about systemic change. In an elevator speech, you can talk about, maybe voting for one policy over another, or this school is better than that school, or, oh, let me tell you about my recipe for XYZ. You cannot, in an elevator speech, break down why we absolutely must have systemic change as a primary mitigator for the heinous things that happen in the name of the United States to our own people and around the world, especially when it comes to militarism. So, it's like okay, here's part one in the elevator, and then we'll have a cup of coffee next week or a cup of tea, and you'll get part two. And by the time you're at 3 or 4, then you're good. That's why we have the movement education and something with another E, training. Help me, Greg Coleridge. Tell me
Well,
what
maybe
me
the other
is.
thing, yeah, well, the other way people can become involved in their communities, for example, is if you're part of an existing organization, or you just know a dozen friends you'd like to get together. We are organizing something called MEET, MEET, which stands for Movement Education and Empowerment Talks. It's somewhat inaccurate to call them talks because these would be more discussions. The idea being that we come to you virtually in this kind of way, but do it in a way that gives you an opportunity, if you are part of an organization, to get a representative of that organization, at least one, if not more, other groups you might want to try to work with, to have a representative from their groups then to come on and let's have a collective chat. Let's talk about what each individual group is doing, but let's figure out, is there any sort of singularity of where these circles, when you put them down on paper, is there a place where these circles overlap in any way? And that is then that sort of quote unquote sweet spot that we can kind of focus on to say, hey, by doing this one or two things, we're sort of helping everybody along the same pathway.
That sounds good. Karen put in the chat that frequently you have to explain an education that just overturning Citizens United is not enough, using examples to show how little control we say we have. Also have been to anti-war demonstrations in Portland. All right, pushing your legislators. Good work, Karen. Thanks for that. The corporate rules stories, I think, are great ways to give people examples of how little control we have. I often think, and our timeline exercise is great, but it takes a while, but it's very powerful. But, in those cases where, because of the leavings, or if you have cost them what they would have their income, you have to pay them. Because I took a picture of your poultry plant doing horrible things that are environmentally incorrect, and as a result of it, you made less money, your takings or whatever it is.
Oh, right.
Then I would be liable to pay this corporation the money they would have made if I hadn't exposed their heinous acts. That's corporate rule. That's my favorite example to give people, because I live in a state where poultry stuff is bad.
I think a good way to do an elevator speech, assuming, the building you're in has about 150 floors, that helps. But is to start out with a single question, which is, do you believe in that we have, anything sort of like a real democracy? You're going to get about 95% at least, I think, saying no. And that provides then to ask, well, what do you think? Do you think people with money have too much political power? Well, yeah. Do you think corporate entities have too much political? An example, use healthcare. The pharmaceutical companies have too much political power, and that you're paying a fair amount of money for the healthcare you're getting or not receiving, or the drugs that, prescription drugs you're getting, or any number of examples like
Mhm.
that. Or you're paying too much for, anything right now.
Mhm.
So I think that's a good way to
That's
sort
a
of
very good way.
enter in.
One of the, I talked to a woman today here in North Carolina who's associated with North Carolina Peace Action, who has MS, and MS is, body stuff is something I deal with as well. If she doesn't take her medication, if she took it, y'all, this is one medication, 100,000 a year. 100,000 a year for one medication. Now, of course, if she had great insurance, it would help, but that doesn't make it okay. Sorry to be so enraged, but this is what happens.
Yeah. I think on this issue area, another sort of talking point or elevator speech point is, to bring up the reality, if you ask people, do you think that, our tax dollars should be funding the maintenance of over 700, some people estimated as high as 800 military bases
On the world, yes.
around the world, literally almost in every country on planet Earth.
Which means we're occupying those places. It's not like we're welcome, guests. We occupy and oppress those countries where we have military bases. Just ask the people that live there.
That's right. And so, that's certainly, I think, a beginning talking point, because there are, of course, again, if you think that militarism and corporatism oftentimes go hand in hand, well, then the presence of those bases are sort of providing a certain safety net and for quote unquote our interests that oftentimes are not really they're corporate interests that are taking advantage of cheap labor or being able to plunder resources and impoverishing people. All right, Karen says frequently you have to explain and educate that. Oh, yeah,
we did
already
that
answered
one.
that, right?
Bill has something there. I just saw his name and it went away. Maybe you can find it.
The cost of prescriptions is the leading cause of death in the US from Project Censored, 2022.
Wow. Not
That's
surprised.
Very good group, Project Censored. All right, any other comments or questions? We certainly don't need to go beyond just to sort of amuse ourselves.
Well, certainly this is not an amusing conversation. It's a buzzkill. In at least. But and we can't leave you on really upbeat notes, but we can leave you on something that doesn't suck.
All right, is there anything else before we do that? A closing song that you want to say or share?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, just that this work is the work that we're supposed to be doing, and we do it with enthusiasm, persistence, and patience. Sometimes a little wine. And thank you for hanging in there, because the rewards are few and far between, and the work is hard. But this is us. So thank you for all that. Whoever is Alfonso, or maybe I can do it. We have to stop recording before I play this last video. Because of capitalism, Gil Scott Heron won't come after us.